Hello and welcome to this review of The Book That Would Not Burn by Mark Lawrence. Many thanks to Mark Lawrence for writing The Book That Would Not Burn. This book utterly enchanted me on every page and on every level, and I rate it 5 out of 5 stars with a guilty feeling that it probably actually deserves an entirely different rating system. The cover is beautiful. I love the cover. You've got a huge, elaborate library that even hints at how elaborate the library inside the book actually is. You've got the gold highlights that sparkle in an enticing way. And when they're not actually highlighted, the title almost vanishes in a way that I can't make the book show. However, so it has been a while since I read that much fantasy, and I have not been that wild for the genre in quite some time, and Lawrence looks like he might be the author that tempts me back. Now, this review will be largely spoiler-free, in the important ways at least. I read it cold, knowing almost nothing about the story except what it says on the back, so I think anyone who's watching this video deserves the same opportunity. I'm sure there are plenty of reviews and TikToks out there full of spoilers. If that's what you're interested in, I urge you to look for them. But all I really went in knowing is the greatest story can reach the stars. Ever has lived his whole life trapped within a vast library, older than empires and larger than cities. Livara, not sure how to pronounce that one. I'm going to go with Liberia, has spent hers in a tiny settlement out on the dust where nightmares stalk and no one goes. The world has never noticed them. That's about to change. So I'm going to say that teaser on the back isn't actually terribly reflective of what the actual contents of the book are, but it's really reflective of the feeling. It's enough to draw you in, and it's enough to bring you to the story. And once you get there, the story will do the rest itself. So, the library. This is the library series, right? And we are readers, and so we love libraries. The library in this book to me is like the library with all the dreams and all the nightmares of all the readers and the writers that you can imagine, all grabbed and mushed together and then laid out in a forever library. It's a dream library, which means that it does contain horrors and it does contain nightmares, and it is really utterly beyond imagination, as every good library should be, I feel. Now, there are a lot of libraries in fiction. Fiction does that because readers love library and bookshop books. But this is beyond a doubt the best one that I've encountered so far. It's got the widest boundaries, the most maturity to the writing. It's got everything that I enjoy. Now, up to now, Sir Terry's wonderful Unseen University Library and his Owl Space were my highest standards for a fiction library, and the Baroque Library at St. Gallen in Switzerland was my highest standard for a real library. But this one takes all those fantasy libraries and exceeds them. And it does not appear at all for the first 3 chapters. So, what are these 3 chapters about? First of all, we get introduced to Liberia, who will be with us for the whole story. And in the beginning, she is a small child living in a tiny oasis village where the villagers eke out a sort of marginal subsistence level in the middle of a desert which they refer to as the dust. Liberia is a bright, tenacious child. She's full of questions and a thirst for adventure. She wants to visit the city. And like many strong characters, she can be a bit annoying at times. She has got this distinctive, strong character, and I really enjoyed Liberia all the way through this book. She was occasionally bratty when she was young, and maybe even when she was a bit older. But she had this vibrant personality that I found thoroughly engaging and a perfect vessel for this story. So, with a lot of the characters in fantasy recently that I've read at least, I felt that they're almost cardboard cutouts of each other. You get the orphan, you get the rebel, you get the person who doesn't fit into their family, and you get this stereotype which you are then meant to use to enjoy the book. And that is not something that I felt with any of the library characters. They all felt well written, They felt rounded. They felt like nuanced combinations of all the things that go into a human, because humans aren't good or bad or one thing or the other. They're always an amalgam. And even when you get fairly marginal characters like some of Liberia's fellow librarians later, they still felt like real characters. They feel like characters that if I turned the side of the street and saw them, I would kind of recognize them just from the descriptions. Not necessarily physically. Lawrence writes with a light touch physically, but in terms of characters and characteristics, yes. Now, after I'd finished this book and was ruminating about it, I realized that in terms of strong characters, the only character in literature that Liberia really reminded me of was Shandy in Phyllis Gottlieb's award-winning Starburst. At least, award-winning, it had a whole award named after it. The Starburst. Sunburst, award. So, at least while Liberia was a child, I feel that Shandy and Liberia could have been friends. Well, come on. Could have been friends, and they had a lot in common. Now, Liberia's arc starts out with brutality, as her village is attacked by Sabbers and the inhabitants are mostly killed. Liberia and several other children are taken captive, they're roped together and marched out of the oasis at the start of a long journey that ends up with Liberia coming to the city and becoming apprenticed to the library. This early encounter with the Sabbers is invaluable for the entirety of the book. Large book, for the entirety of it. Because Sabbers are described there as you see them as bipedal but not human. They've got fur and a few other differences from humanity. And we find out that from Liberia, both in the beginning and later on when she reaches the city, that Sabbers are like the primary or almost a primeval enemy of mankind. They're demonized and diminished, as we humans tend to do with our enemies. So they are described as functionally illiterate, which you find out later is not so, that they actually have a whole part of the library books in their own tongue, and Liberia actually learns to read them and to speak it. So they're also demonized and described as interbreeding with dogs and other things. Now, though Liberia hates them for having killed her people and all the terrible things, we as readers have seen Sabbers in a more nuanced aspect than is given to us later in the book. We've seen that they have language and a sense of humor even. We've seen that they've got an organization, and though we see them killing and attacking Liberia's village, so we see the more militant or martial aspect of their culture, we have some preparation for finding out that they have an actual culture. And I won't say more about that, but Lawrence definitely in this book deals with the us versus them, enemy versus tribe, and he does it in a lot of different ways, which I think are becoming increasingly relevant in today's world. So, enough. Our first introduction to the library actually comes a bit chapter 3 or 4, I think it is, through Eva. Eva and his family of 3 brothers and 1 sister, like the back of the book says, have grown up in one enormous sealed part of the library. They can't get out, but they are safe there. This part is stacked full of piles of books. No shelves, no organization, just piles of books everywhere that you trek through. And they've grown up reading them and roaming the area in this solitude, but they've been brought up by 2 mechanical guardians. Now, Evan is a likable, relatable character who feels diminished by the fact that he is the only one in his family who has no strong talent. All of these five have emerged from mechanism as children and reared there. The other siblings emerged from the mechanism with a book, which they've been in the mechanism with. And the mechanism does some strange thing in which that book entirely is internalized. It's an actual lived experience of the person who's in there with the book. So his sister was thrown into it with a military book as Sabbers murdered the rest of her people. She has become practically a goddess of war, a tactician bent on fighting and destroying Sabbers as they destroyed her family. One of his brothers has emerged as a historian. Another one has emerged as a psychologist. But Eva just emerged with this sense of having lost someone who he knew in the mechanism but can't remember. and he feels diminished by having no special talent, despite the fact that each one of his siblings has taught him some of their talent. So he's the second best warrior there, though he can never be better than his sister. He's the second best historian there, though he can never equal his brother. So we have that character who's pleasant, likable, good at a whole heap of things, but not the best at any. And then Eva and Liveria meet in the most amazing place. Liveria? I'm going to go with Liveria still. Now, seriously, I squealed when this location materialized in the book. If you have not read C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, you won't recognize it, but I expect you to still be fascinated by it. It's a great intermediate spot. If you have read C.S. Lewis, in The Magician's Nephew, you may remember that the children first got to travel between worlds by going to a place with trees and pools. It's a magical place that I loved at the time, and which, though it featured in a pivotal role in that book, it was never really expanded upon. I don't think C.S. Lewis ever took it to another level. It was just a part of that book, and no explanation was ever forthcoming. So I can only assume that Mark Lawrence must have felt, like I did, that this was a location that needed more done with it, and he took it and he's expanded it in this book in a way really completely different to what C.S. Lewis did, because this is a completely different book, but it's the same concept, and it's so much more, I keep using the word nuanced, but it is. It's so much more nuanced, so much more extended, and so much more adult than The Magician's Nephew. Which brings me to one of the really marvelous things about this story. You get nods to so many other books and authors and genres. So much is incorporated, and it's so clever. I feel that this is the book by an omnivorous reader who became an omnivorous writer for omnivorous readers. I got so many references, and I am certain that I didn't even get a half of them. But it made the chapter introductions fun. And the snippets that kept on me on the edge of my seat reading. Let's find one, for example. So, each chapter starts with a little quote which has a book and an author. Like I said, I know I didn't get even half of them, but at some point I read one and I went, wait. I half recognize that quote, but I'm sure it's not associated with that author. And they kind of are, but they kind of aren't. So I imagine lots of people know the Benedict Cumberbatch situation, the game of saying Betadine Cabbage Patch, and everyone knows who you're talking about. Lawrence kind of done this with a whole heap of authors. You've got authors that you read their name and you know who they are, but it isn't the right name. It's misspelled. And he has a lot of fun with that. If there is one criticism you can make about the book that wouldn't burn, it would be that there's not a lot of humor in it. The humor is lurking entirely in these references and these chapter starts. I really enjoyed it. They're not only in the beginnings of the chapters either, because throughout the actual text there's references. In one chapter, for example, there's a whole heap of books that have been stacked in one area to be used by toilet paper by a particular author who wrote so many books. It's misspelt, but it's quite obviously Enid Blyton, and I laughed. Like many children of English origin, I grew up with a lot of Enid Blyton books, The Famous Five, The Faraway Tree, all of those. Like many children, I adored them. My parents refused to read them out loud to me. And as an adult trying to come back to these books, I realised why. They're poorly written. My poor parents trying to be forced to read those things. I can't read them as an adult. And so the fact that Enid Blyton by another name is being used as toilet paper, I found very amusing. The quote at the start of the chapter 45 is from a book written by Jorg of Ancraft, who is a character in one of Mark Lawrence's other series, the one that made me buy this book sight unseen, in fact, The Broken Empire. So, even if the omnivorous writing does not grab you as it did me, this is still a wonderful book. It takes no shortcuts with world buildings. It's never lazy about its character creation and its character evolution. Its characters don't perhaps evolve as much as in some books, but we're only 1/3 of the way through. We've got space, and the adventures they experience and the background, which is a slow reveal, is so perfect that, yeah. I never missed character progression, let's put it that way. One thing that I really, really enjoyed, which is not, in my experience, common with a lot of recent fantasy that I've been exposed to, this book treats the reader like an intelligent adult, and I enjoyed that thoroughly. I'm not going to mention names, but there are a few books out there that are very, very tick-tocked, which treat the reader like they're 3-year-old who's only just learnt to read, and they're meant to be adult books. So, no rants, no raves. This is a marvelous book. I enjoyed it every step of the way. I am very grateful to having found this book, in fact. This book is a smaller size. Most of the ones in all the bookshelves were this much larger, which means they don't fit on my primary shelves. I only found this one copy in this one store. The only reason I haven't bought the next one, which is The Book That Burnt the World. The book that did something horrible to the world. The library series number 2. I've ordered it from my library, in fact, but I will buy it as soon as it reaches an achievable size. That's the only thing that's stopping me pre-ordering number 3, Sight Unseen, as well, by the way. So, many, many thanks to The Book That Would Not Burn for getting me out of my reading slump. I was so happy with this reading experience. I'm wandering away, happy to read the next book, whatever it may be. I haven't chosen one yet. And, the ending. Can I say anything about the ending without it being a spoiler? I don't think I can. I'm just going to say that there is what would normally be a surprise revelation at the end, but this book does something really smart. The surprise, shock, horror, I did not see that coming. Revelation at the end, well, maybe a tiny bit, but only in hindsight. I'll admit that I didn't see it coming. It happens about this far away from the actual end, so we get time to explore it. We aren't just hit by this major shock and then have to metabolize it while going on to the next book. No, we develop it. We elaborate on it. We let the characters stew, and we let the readers stew even more. Marvelous book. Thoroughly recommend. Thoroughly enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. If you can think of any modern fiction that you think is as good as this, let me know what it is, because I probably haven't read it.